Picture this. You hire a quiet woman to cook your meals and keep your house. She's polite, hardworking, never asks for anything more than her wages. But then you start noticing things. The way she flinches when you move too quickly. How she always wears long sleeves, even in the Texas heat. The careful way she sets down plates like she's afraid of making noise. Wade Carter thought he was just getting help around his ranch. What he got was a woman running from a nightmare that wouldn't let her go. You see, in 1883 Texas, some men believed they owned whatever they could take. They used money, fear, and violence to keep what they claimed was theirs. And when a woman tried to escape that kind of hell, there weren't many places to hide. But Wade Carter's ranch was different. It was 20 miles from the nearest town, surrounded by nothing but grass and sky and the kind of silence that could heal a broken soul. Wade had been living alone there for 3 years, ever since he lost his wife and unborn child. He'd built walls around his heart that seemed unbreakable, until the day he saw the bruises. What Wade didn't know was that helping Vera cross would mean facing down one of the most dangerous men in Texas, a man who had judges in his pocket, sheriffs on his payroll, and a reputation for taking back what he considered his property, no matter what it cost, no matter who got hurt. This is the story of a woman who learned that sometimes the only way to stop running is to stand and fight. And a man who discovered that some things are worth risking everything to protect. Because when love meets evil on the frontier, somebody's going to fall. The only question is who'll be left standing when the smoke clears. The skillet hissed like an angry rattler as Vera Cross set it down on the wood stove, steam rising from the bacon fat in lazy spirals that caught the morning light. She'd been cooking for Wade Carter for 6 months now, and in all that time, she'd perfected the art of being invisible. Quiet footsteps, soft voice, never looking him directly in the eye for more than a heartbeat. But this morning was different. This morning her sleeve caught on the pot handle as she reached for the coffee, and the fabric slid up her forearm just enough for Wade to see what she'd been hiding underneath. The bruise was dark as a thundercloud, purple-black at the center with yellow edges that spoke of days-old pain. It wrapped around her wrist like a handprint, fingers and thumb clearly defined against her pale skin. Wade's coffee cup stopped halfway to his lips, his gray eyes, usually as calm as still water, sharpened with something dangerous. But he didn't say anything. Not yet. Just watched as Vera quickly tugged the sleeve back down and turned away, her movements suddenly jerky with panic. "Biscuits are ready," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor Wade could see in her hands. "And I made extra gravy, like you asked." Wade set down his cup with deliberate care. The scrape of ceramic against wood seemed loud in the sudden tension that filled the kitchen. Outside, his cattle were lowing in the distance, and somewhere a crow cawed harsh and mocking. But inside the small ranch house, the silence stretched tight as a bowstring. "Vera," Wade said finally, his voice low and careful. "Who did that to you?" She froze with her back to him, hands gripping the edge of the stove. For a moment, Wade thought she might pretend she hadn't heard, might keep playing the game they'd both been playing for 6 months, where he pretended not to notice the fear in her eyes and she pretended everything was fine. But then her shoulders sagged, just a little, like something inside her had finally cracked. "It don't matter," she whispered. "It's done." Wade pushed back from the table, his chair scraping against the rough wooden floor. He was a big man, tall and broad-shouldered from years of ranch work, but he moved carefully now, like he was approaching a spooked horse. "You don't believe that," he said. Vera turned to face him, and Wade saw something in her brown eyes that made his chest tight. Not fear exactly, something deeper, something that spoke of a woman who'd learned not to hope for rescue because rescue never came. "I believe it's none of your business," she said, folding her arms across her chest in a gesture that was half defiance, half protection. "You hired me to cook and keep house. That's what I'm doing." Wade studied her face, taking in details he'd been too polite or too wrapped up in his own grief to notice before. The way she held herself, always ready to run or duck. The careful way she moved, like someone who'd learned that sudden movements brought pain. The faint scar at her hairline that he'd assumed came from a childhood accident, but now wondered about. "How long?" he asked quietly. "How long what? How long has someone been hurting you?" Vera's facade cracked a little more. Her lips pressed together in a thin line, and Wade saw the muscles in her jaw, working like she was fighting to keep words locked inside. "I need to check on the chickens," she said instead, moving toward the back door. But Wade stepped into her path, not blocking her exactly, but making it clear he wasn't ready to let this go. Up close, he could see the exhaustion in her face, the way her skin was pulled tight over sharp cheekbones. She was too thin, he realized. Had been since the day she'd shown up looking for work, but he'd attributed it to the hardships of frontier life. Now he wondered if it was something else entirely. "Vera," he said, and something in his tone made her look up at him. "You're safe here. Whatever happened before, whoever hurt you, they can't touch you here." For just a moment, her mask slipped completely. Wade saw the woman underneath the careful politeness, the one who'd been running so long she'd forgotten what it felt like to stand still. She looked young and old at the same time, beautiful and broken and fierce in a way that made Wade's heart stumble. Then the moment passed, and the walls went back up. "I need to tend to my duties, Mr. Carter," she said formally. "Those chickens won't feed themselves." Wade let her go, but he didn't forget. Couldn't forget, even as he went about his morning chores. The image of that bruise stayed with him as he checked the fence line, as he moved cattle to fresh pasture, as he repaired the barn door that had been hanging crooked for weeks. Someone had put their hands on Vera Cross in anger. Someone had gripped her wrist hard enough to leave marks that lasted days. And the careful way she moved, the constant alertness in her eyes, suggested it hadn't been the first time. The thought made Wade's jaw clench and his hands curl into fists. He'd never been a violent man by nature, but 3 years of grief and isolation had left him with a lot of anger and nowhere to put it. The idea of someone hurting a woman, especially one under his protection, awakened something cold and hard in his chest. By noon, the Texas sun was beating down merciless and bright, turning the air into something you could almost chew. Wade came back to the house for lunch, hoping to try again with Vera, but she'd left a plate covered with a clean dishcloth and disappeared. He found her in the vegetable garden behind the house, kneeling between rows of beans and squash, her long skirts spread around her like brown wings. She had her sleeves rolled up now, either from the heat or because she'd given up trying to hide the evidence. Wade's breath caught in his throat. The bruise on her wrist was just the beginning. Purple fingerprints dotted her forearms like some terrible flower pattern. A yellowing mark on her shoulder spoke of an older injury, one that had been healing for weeks. And when she reached up to wipe sweat from her forehead, Wade caught a glimpse of what looked like rope burns around her other wrist. This wasn't just an argument that got out of hand. This was systematic, deliberate, the kind of cruelty that spoke of a man who enjoyed causing pain. Wade's vision went red around the edges. His hands clenched so tight his knuckles went white, and it took every ounce of self-control he possessed not to demand answers right there in the garden. Instead, he forced himself to breathe, to think. Vera Cross had come to him 6 months ago with a simple request: work in exchange for room and board. She'd been clean, polite, and desperate in a way that was carefully hidden but unmistakable to someone who'd been desperate himself. He said yes because he needed help and she needed sanctuary. But somewhere along the way, without him quite realizing it, she'd become more than just hired help. She'd become the thing that made his empty house feel like a home again. And now someone was trying to take that away. "Vera," he said softly, not wanting to startle her. She looked up, shading her eyes with one bruised hand. In the harsh afternoon light, she looked impossibly fragile, like a strong wind might blow her away. "Mr. Carter, is something wrong?" Everything, Wade thought. Everything is wrong. But what he said was, "Come inside. It's too hot to be working out here." "I'm fine," she said automatically. "Just finishing up with the weeding." It's not a request. There was something in Wade's voice that made Vera's eyes widen. Not fear exactly, but recognition. The acknowledgement that something had shifted between them, that the careful distance they'd maintained was no longer possible. She stood slowly, brushing dirt from her skirts, and followed him into the house. The kitchen was blessedly cool after the brutal heat outside, and Wade poured 2 glasses of water from the pitcher on the counter. "Sit," he said, pulling out a chair at the small wooden table. Vera hesitated, then perched on the edge of the seat like she was ready to bolt at the first sign of trouble. Wade sat across from her, close enough to see the rapid pulse at her throat, the way her fingers gripped the water glass like it was an anchor. "I'm going to ask you again," Wade said quietly, "and this time, I'd appreciate an honest answer. Who hurt you?" Vera stared into her water glass for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was so low Wade had to lean forward to catch the words. "His name is Victor Blackthorne." The name meant nothing to Wade, but the way Vera said it, like it left a bad taste in her mouth, told him everything he needed to know about the man's character. "Is he your husband?" Vera's laugh was bitter as day-old coffee. "He thinks he is. Thinks he owns me like I'm livestock or furniture." She looked up at Wade and her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I tried to leave him 3 times. Each time he found me. Each time he made sure I remembered why running was a mistake." Wade felt that cold, hard thing in his chest expand. "How did you end up here?" "Got lucky. He was away on business when I made my last run, took what I could carry, and got on the first stage heading west." Vera's fingers traced the rim of her glass. "I've been looking over my shoulder ever since, waiting for him to find me again." "And you think he will?" Vera met his eyes, and Wade saw the truth there before she spoke it. "I know he will. Victor Blackthorne doesn't let go of what he considers his, and he considers me his property." The words hit Wade like a physical blow. The idea that anyone could look at Vera Cross, intelligent, hardworking, kind Vera, and see property instead of a person made something violent and protective rear up in his chest. "He's not getting you back," Wade said, and his voice carried a promise that was harder than iron. Vera shook her head. "You don't understand. Victor isn't just some angry man. He's got money, influence. Half the judges in Texas owe him favors, and the other half are too scared to cross him. When he comes, and he will come, there won't be anywhere left to run." Wade leaned back in his chair, studying the woman across from him. 6 months ago, she'd been a stranger looking for work. Now she was... what? He wasn't sure he could name it, but he knew it mattered. She mattered. "Then we don't run," he said simply. Vera's eyes widened. "Mr. Carter, you don't know what you're saying. Victor destroyed the last man who tried to help me, burned his business, ruined his reputation, made sure he could never work in Texas again. And that was just for giving me a place to stay for 3 days." Wade stood and walked to the window, looking out at the land he'd built with his own hands. Acres of grass and cattle, fences straight and strong, buildings that would stand against wind and time. It was a good life, a peaceful life. But peace that came from hiding wasn't really peace at all. "I've been alone for 3 years, he said without turning around. "Ever since I lost my wife and baby. Thought I wanted it that way. Thought solitude was safer than caring about someone." He turned back to Vera, and she saw something in his gray eyes that made her breath catch. "But you've made this place feel like home again. Made me remember what it's like to have someone to come back to at the end of the day. I'm not giving that up without a fight." Vera stood slowly, her face pale. "You're talking about going to war with a man who could destroy you with a telegram. Why would you do that for me?" Wade looked at her for a long moment, taking in the bruises, the fear, the stubborn courage that had carried her this far. "Because it's the right thing to do. And because..." He stopped, the words catching in his throat. "Because somewhere in the last 6 months, without him realizing it, she'd become important. More than important. But that was a truth for another day, assuming they both lived to see it. Because you deserve better than to spend your life running," he finished instead. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance, and the first drops of rain began to spatter against the windows. Neither of them noticed. They were too busy staring at each other across a kitchen table, both knowing that everything had just changed. Victor Blackthorne was coming, and when he arrived, Wade Carter would be ready. The only question was whether ready would be enough. The storm that had been threatening all afternoon finally broke just after sunset, turning the sky black and sending sheets of rain against the windows like bullets. Wade sat by the fire, cleaning his rifle with methodical precision, while Vera washed the supper dishes with movements that were too careful, too quiet. Neither of them had spoken much since their conversation in the kitchen. The words hung between them like smoke, heavy with promises and threats and the weight of a future neither could predict. But Wade could feel Vera watching him when she thought he wasn't looking, could sense the war going on behind her brown eyes as she tried to decide whether to trust him with the full truth or pack her few belongings and disappear into the night. The decision was made for her when lightning split the sky outside, followed by thunder so loud it shook the windows. Vera jumped, dropping the plate she'd been drying. It shattered against the floor in a spray of white ceramic, and she immediately dropped to her knees, scrambling to collect the pieces. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice tight with panic. "I'm so sorry. I'll replace it. Vera!" Wade set down his rifle and crossed to where she knelt among the broken pottery. "It's just a plate." But she was shaking now, her hands moving frantically to gather every shard, even the ones too small to matter. Wade saw a thin line of blood where a sharp edge had cut her palm, but she didn't seem to notice. "He hated it when I broke things," she whispered, more to herself than to Wade. "Said it showed I was careless, ungrateful. Said I needed to learn to be more careful with what belonged to him." Wade knelt beside her, gently catching her hands to still their frantic movement. Her skin was cold despite the warmth of the room, and he could feel the tremors running through her like aftershocks. "Look at me," he said softly. "Look at me, Vera." She raised her eyes to his, and Wade saw the past written there in shadows and fear. Saw the woman who'd learned to flinch at thunder because it sounded too much like an angry man's voice. "It's just a plate," he repeated, "and this is my house, not his. Nobody's going to hurt you for an accident." Vera stared at him for a long moment, as if trying to process words that didn't make sense in the language of fear she'd been speaking for too long. Then something in her face cracked, and the tears she'd been holding back since that morning finally came. Wade didn't hesitate. He pulled her against his chest, one hand stroking her dark hair while she sobbed into his shirt. She felt impossibly small in his arms, all sharp angles and bird bones, like she'd been broken down to her essential parts and forgotten how to rebuild. "Tell me," Wade said when her tears finally slowed. "Tell me all of it." And sitting there on the kitchen floor, surrounded by broken ceramic and the sound of rain, Vera Cross finally told the truth. "I met Victor when I was 17, she began, her voice steady now but distant, like she was recounting someone else's story. "I was working in a restaurant in San Antonio, trying to save money to bring my younger brother west. Victor was charming, handsome. He had money and manners, and he made me feel like I was something special instead of just another working girl." Wade kept stroking her hair, saying nothing, letting her find her own pace. "He courted me proper, brought flowers, took me to nice places. When he asked me to marry him, I thought I was the luckiest girl in Texas." Vera's laugh was bitter. "The first time he hit me was on our wedding night. I'd said something he didn't like, and he backhanded me so hard I saw stars. Then he apologized, bought me a necklace, told me he'd only done it because he loved me so much he couldn't bear the thought of me being anything less than perfect." Wade's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice gentle. "How long were you married?" 3 years. 3 years of walking on eggshells, of learning which words would set him off, which looks, which gestures. He never hit me where it would show at first. He was too smart for that, too careful about his reputation. But as time went on, he got bolder. Started to think of me as his private property that he could do whatever he wanted with." Thunder rolled overhead again, and Vera tensed in Wade's arms. But this time she didn't break. "What about your brother?" Wade asked. "The one you were saving money for?" Vera's face went very still. "Victor found out I was sending him money, said a wife's loyalty belonged to her husband, not her family. He made sure I understood that I wasn't to contact my brother again." Wade felt that cold thing in his chest expand until it filled his whole body. What did he do? Had him arrested on false charges, bribery, theft, things that could have put him in prison for years. Then Victor made me a deal, cut all ties with my brother and never contact him again, and the charges would disappear. But if I ever tried to reach out. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. "Where's your brother now?" Wade asked. "Safe, as far as I know. Living in California under a different name. I haven't spoken to him in 4 years." Vera's voice broke slightly. He probably thinks I'm dead, or that I stopped caring about him. Wade closed his eyes, trying to imagine the kind of man who would use a woman's love for her family as a weapon against her. The picture that emerged made him want to put his fist through the wall. How did you finally get away? Vera was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing absent patterns on Wade's shirt. Victor had business in Dallas, some kind of cattle deal that was going to keep him away for 2 weeks. He locked me in the house before he left, like he always did, but this time I was ready. I'd been planning for months, saving every penny I could hide, memorizing stage schedules. She pulled back to look at Wade, and he saw a different woman now. Not the broken victim, but the survivor who'd been hiding underneath. I broke the window in the parlor and climbed out. Cut myself doing it, but I didn't care. I walked 6 miles to town, got on the first stage heading west, and never looked back. That was 6 months ago? 7. I worked in a hotel in Fort Worth for a few weeks, then heard Victor was asking questions there. So I ran again. Ended up in Cedar Falls with nothing but the clothes on my back and $3 to my name. Wade remembered the day she'd come to his door, dusty and desperate and trying so hard to look respectable despite her obvious poverty. He'd almost turned her away, not because he didn't need help, but because having a woman around felt like a betrayal of his dead wife's memory. Now he thanked God he'd been too tired and too lonely to stick to his principles. He's been looking for you all this time? Vera nodded. Victor doesn't accept defeat, and he especially doesn't accept being defied by someone he considers his property. He put out word through his network of contacts, offered rewards for information. It's just a matter of time before someone tells him where I am. What makes you so sure? Vera reached into her skirt pocket and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. Because I found this nailed to the fence post this morning while you were checking the cattle. Wade took the paper with hands that weren't quite steady. The message was short, written in an elegant script that somehow managed to look threatening. I know where you are, my dear wife. Enjoy your little vacation. V. Wade stared at the words until they blurred together. This morning? Why didn't you tell me? Because I was afraid you'd ask me to leave. Vera's voice was barely above a whisper. And I wasn't ready to run again. Not yet. Wade folded the paper carefully and tucked it into his own pocket. Well, you were right about one thing. I am going to ask you something. Vera tensed, preparing for rejection. I'm going to ask you to stay, Wade said, because Victor Blackthorne may think he knows where you are, but he doesn't know who you're with, and that's going to make all the difference. Hope flickered in Vera's eyes, quickly followed by fear. Wade, you don't understand what kind of man he is. He's not just wealthy, he's ruthless. He owns judges, sheriffs, businessmen. He could destroy your life with a word. Then it's a good thing I've got more than words to fight back with. Wade stood and walked to a wooden chest in the corner of the room. From inside, he pulled out a gun belt and holster, well-oiled and worn smooth from use. The Colt .45 nestled in the leather looked like it had seen action. You were in the war, Vera said. It wasn't a question. Texas Rangers, after that, spent 5 years tracking down men who thought they were above the law. Wade strapped on the gun belt, settling it low on his hips with practiced ease. Victor Blackthorne may have money and influence, but I've got something he doesn't. What's that? Wade looked at her, and Vera saw something in his gray eyes that made her pulse quicken. Something hard and implacable, and utterly without fear. I've got right on my side, and I've got you to protect. Outside, the storm was beginning to blow itself out, the thunder growing more distant and the rain softening from a roar to a whisper. But inside the small ranch house, another kind of storm was brewing, the kind that came when an unstoppable force was about to meet an immovable object. Vera stood slowly, smoothing down her skirts with hands that had finally stopped shaking. So what do we do now? Now we get ready. Wade checked the cylinder of his revolver, counting bullets like he was counting prayers. Because if Victor Blackthorne wants you back, he's going to have to go through me to get you. And if he does, if he comes with men and guns and all that money to back him up, Wade holstered his weapon and turned to face her. Then we'll remind him that some things can't be bought, some people can't be intimidated, and some fights are worth having no matter what they cost. Vera looked at this man who'd somehow become her protector, her champion, maybe something even more precious than that. Wade Carter had been a stranger 6 months ago, just another lonely rancher looking for help around his property. But somewhere between the morning coffee and the evening chores, between the careful silences and the growing trust, he'd become something else entirely. He'd become home. Why? She asked, the question that had been burning in her chest all day. Why are you willing to risk everything for me? Wade was quiet for a long moment, staring into the dying fire. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of truth too long unspoken. Because for the first time in 3 years, I have something worth protecting again. And I'll be damned if I let some bastard in a fancy suit take that away from me. Outside, the last of the thunder rolled away into the distance, leaving only the gentle patter of rain and the whisper of wind through the grass. But inside, two people who'd found each other in the aftermath of loss, prepared for a war they might not win. And somewhere in the darkness, Victor Blackthorne was coming. 3 days passed without incident, but the tension hung over the ranch like heat shimmer, visible if you knew how to look for it. Wade went about his daily chores with his gun belt strapped on, eyes constantly scanning the horizon. Vera cooked and cleaned with the efficiency born of nervous energy, starting at every unexpected sound. They moved around each other like dancers learning new steps, careful and deliberate, both pretending this was normal while preparing for war. It was on the fourth morning that the dust cloud appeared. Wade spotted it first from the corral where he was breaking a young stallion, a thin line of brown against the blue sky, maybe 2 miles out and moving steady toward the ranch. Too much dust for one rider, not enough for a cattle drive, just right for trouble. Vera, he called, his voice carrying the controlled calm of a man who'd faced danger before. Get in the house. She appeared in the doorway, dish towel still in her hands, and followed his gaze to the approaching riders. Even at this distance, Wade could see her face go white. Is it him? Don't know yet, but we're not taking chances. Wade swung down from the corral fence, his hand instinctively checking his weapon. Get the shotgun from behind the kitchen door. Load both barrels. Vera nodded and disappeared inside. Wade walked to the center of the yard, positioning himself between the house and whatever was coming. The young stallion snorted and pawed at the ground, sensing the tension in the air. As the riders drew closer, Wade counted them. 4 men on horseback, moving with the unhurried confidence of people who weren't expecting resistance. The leader rode a black gelding that probably cost more than most men made in a year, and even from a distance, Wade could see the quality of his clothes. Victor Blackthorne didn't look like a monster. That was the first thing Wade noticed as the man dismounted 50 yards from the house. He was average height, well-dressed in a dark suit that somehow managed to look fresh despite the dust and heat. His hair was silver at the temples, giving him a distinguished appearance that probably served him well in business dealings. But it was the way he moved that told Wade everything he needed to know about the man's character. Victor walked like he owned whatever ground his feet touched, like the very air around him bent to his will. His 3 companions stayed mounted, hands resting casually near their weapons. You must be Wade Carter, Victor said, his voice carrying the cultured accent of education and money. I'm Victor Blackthorne. I believe you have something that belongs to me. Wade didn't move, didn't blink. I don't believe we've been introduced properly, Mr. Blackthorne, and I don't recall having anything of yours. Victor's smile was as cold as January wind. Oh, but you do. My wife seems to have gotten confused, thinks she can just walk away from her obligations. I'm here to help her remember where she belongs. Your wife? Wade let skepticism color his voice. Funny thing about that, the lady in question tells a different story. Says she left you because you couldn't keep your hands to yourself. The mask slipped for just a moment. Wade saw something ugly flicker behind Victor's polite facade, something that spoke of violence barely held in check. Vera has always been dramatic, Victor said, the smile returning but not reaching his eyes. She tends to exaggerate small domestic disagreements. Surely a man of your experience understands that women sometimes need a firm hand to guide them? Wade felt that cold thing in his chest expand. I understand that any man who puts his hands on a woman in anger isn't much of a man at all. Victor's companions shifted in their saddles. Wade noted their positions, the way they wore their guns, the careful spacing that would give them clear fields of fire. Professional gunmen, not common cowboys. "Mr. Carter," Victor said, his tone becoming more formal, more dangerous. "I appreciate your chivalrous instincts, but you're interfering in a private matter between a husband and wife. Surely you can see the impropriety of that." "What I can see," Wade replied, "is a man who rode onto my property with armed men to threaten a woman under my protection. That makes it my business." Victor studied Wade with new interest, like he was reassessing a situation that hadn't gone according to plan. "Your protection? How interesting. Tell me, Mr. Carter, what exactly has my wife offered you in exchange for this protection?" The implication in Victor's voice made Wade's jaw clench. "Watch your mouth, Blackthorn. I'm simply trying to understand the arrangement. Vera is a beautiful woman, and you're a man who's been alone for, what is it, 3 years now? Since your wife and child died in that fire?" Wade went very still. The fact that Victor knew about his past meant the man had done his research, had prepared for this confrontation. It also meant he wasn't above using a man's grief as a weapon. "You're walking a thin line," Wade said quietly. "Am I? Or am I simply stating facts?" Victor's smile widened. "You see, Mr. Carter, I make it my business to know about anyone who might interfere with my interests. You were a Texas Ranger once, good at your job by all accounts. But that was before tragedy broke you, before you crawled out here to hide from the world." Wade heard the soft creak of a floorboard behind him and knew Vera was listening from just inside the doorway, hearing her past and his dissected like specimens in a jar. "The thing about broken men," Victor continued, "is that they're vulnerable to the first pretty face that shows them kindness, makes them do foolish things, take unnecessary risks. Like standing up to bullies?" Victor's laugh was genuine, which somehow made it more chilling. "Like thinking they can win a fight against someone with real power. Do you know how much money I have, Mr. Carter? How many people owe me favors? How many judges have ruled in my favor over the years? Can't say I much care. You should, because with a word from me, you could lose this ranch. A simple complaint about harboring a fugitive wife, a few suggestions about improper conduct, maybe some questions about that fire that killed your family." Victor shrugged. "These things have a way of growing in the telling." Wade's hand moved closer to his gun. "Are you threatening me, Blackthorn?" "I'm offering you a choice. Send Vera out here. Let her come home where she belongs, and this ends peacefully. Everyone goes back to their lives, no harm done. And if I refuse?" Victor's mask dropped completely then, revealing the predator underneath. "Then you'll learn why smart men don't cross Victor Blackthorn." The silence stretched between them, heavy with the promise of violence. Wade could feel Vera's eyes on his back, could sense her fear and guilt warring with something else. Hope, maybe. The radical idea that someone might actually stand up for her. "Well," Wade said finally, "I guess I've never been accused of being smart." Victor's face darkened. "This is your last chance, Carter. Send her out, or what?" Wade cut him off. "You'll shoot me down in my own yard? Murder a man in front of witnesses? That might be harder to explain than you think. Who says anything about murder? Accidents happen all the time on remote ranches. Men fall from horses, get trampled by cattle, suffer terrible burns in barn fires." Victor's voice carried the casual indifference of a man discussing the weather. "And grieving widows sometimes make poor decisions about where they go for comfort." The threat was clear, and so was the promise behind it. Victor wasn't just threatening Wade. He was threatening to hurt Vera in ways that would make his previous abuse look gentle. "Mr. Blackthorn," Wade said, his voice deadly quiet, "I think it's time you left my property. Not without my wife. She's not your wife anymore. She's a free woman under the protection of the law and my gun. And if you don't turn around and ride out of here in the next 60 seconds, you're going to find out just how seriously I take that protection." Victor stared at him for a long moment, then looked past Wade toward the house. "Vera, darling, I know you're listening. Come out here and let's discuss this like civilized people." No answer from the house, but Wade felt the floorboard creak again. She doesn't want to talk to you, Wade said. She doesn't know what she wants. That's always been her problem. Victor raised his voice. Vera, I'm offering you one last chance to come home voluntarily. If I have to come back with more men, with legal papers, things will go much harder for everyone involved. This time Vera did answer, her voice carrying clearly from the house. Go to hell, Victor. Victor's face flushed red with anger. You'll regret this, you ungrateful little… Time's up, Wade interrupted. Get off my land. This isn't over, Carter. Not by a long shot. Looking forward to the next round. Victor mounted his horse with sharp, angry movements. As he gathered his reins, he looked back at Wade with naked hatred. You have no idea what you brought down on yourself. I tried to be reasonable, tried to give you a way out. Now you'll learn what happens to men who steal from Victor Blackthorne. I didn't steal anything. She chose to leave you, chose to stay here. Maybe that's what really bothers you, knowing that when given a choice, she picked a broken-down rancher over you. Victor's hand moved toward his gun, but one of his men, a scarred gunslinger with the look of a professional killer, reached out and caught his wrist. Not here, boss, the man said quietly. Too open, too risky. Victor controlled himself with visible effort. You're right, of course. Some things require careful planning. He spurred his horse toward the road, his men following. But as they reached the edge of Wade's property, Victor turned back one last time. Enjoy your little victory, Carter. It'll be your last. Wade stood in his yard long after the dust had settled, watching the horizon and thinking. Victor Blackthorne was everything Vera had said, and worse. A man who saw people as possessions, who used wealth and influence to get his way. The kind of man who would burn down the world rather than admit he'd lost. But Wade had faced men like that before, in the war and during his ranger days. Bullies, all of them, dangerous because of their resources, but ultimately cowards who folded when faced with real resistance. The problem was, Victor wasn't done. Wade could see it in the man's eyes, hear it in his voice. This had been a reconnaissance mission, a chance to size up the opposition and deliver threats. The real attack would come later, when Victor had time to plan and prepare. Wade! Vera's voice from the doorway, soft and uncertain. He turned to find her standing there, the shotgun still in her hands but pointed at the ground. Her face was pale but determined, and Wade saw something in her eyes he hadn't seen before. Not just fear or hope, but resolve. Thank you, she said simply. Wade nodded. This isn't over, Vera. You know that, right? He'll be back. I know, but for the first time in years, I'm not facing him alone. Wade looked at this woman who'd somehow become the center of his world and made a decision that would change both their lives forever. You'll never face him alone again, he promised. Whatever comes next, we face it together. Outside, storm clouds were gathering on the horizon, and somewhere in the distance, Victor Blackthorne was planning his next move. But on the Carter Ranch, two people who'd found each other in the aftermath of loss prepared to fight for something worth keeping. That evening, Wade rode into Cedar Falls with the setting sun at his back and determination in his eyes. He'd left Vera at the ranch with strict instructions to keep the doors locked and the shotgun close, though they both knew that if Victor decided to move against them tonight, a locked door wouldn't be much protection. The town was settling into its evening routine as Wade tied his horse to the hitching post outside Murphy's saloon. Oil lamps flickered to life in windows, and the sound of piano music drifted from the saloon's batwing doors. It looked peaceful, normal, but Wade knew that appearances could be deceiving. Victor Blackthorne had money and influence, and men like that had a way of making their problems everyone else's problems. Wade pushed through the saloon doors and immediately spotted the man he was looking for. Captain Thomas Ford sat alone at a corner table, nursing a whiskey and reading a week-old newspaper by lamplight. Even in retirement, the former Texas Ranger looked like he could handle whatever trouble came his way. Ford was in his 50s, with graying hair and a weathered face that had seen too much violence to be impressed by threats. His left eye was milky white from an old scar, but his right one was sharp as a hawk's. He'd lost the eye fighting Comancheros along the border, but he'd taken down 3 of them before they managed to mark him. Wade approached the table slowly, his spurs ringing against the wooden floor. "Captain Ford." Ford looked up from his paper, his good eye studying Wade with interest. "Well, if it isn't Wade Carter. Haven't seen you in town for months. What brings you off that ranch of yours?" Wade pulled out a chair and sat down without being invited. "Trouble. The kind that requires an old ranger's advice." Ford folded his newspaper and leaned back, suddenly more alert. "What kind of trouble?" Wade glanced around the saloon, noting who was listening and who was minding their own business. Murphy was behind the bar, polishing glasses with the studious attention of a man who'd learned to be deaf when customers wanted privacy. A few cowboys played cards at a nearby table, but they were focused on their game. "You ever hear of a man named Victor Blackthorne?" Ford's expression didn't change, but Wade saw his jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. "I've heard the name. Cattle baron from down south, owns half of San Antonio and most of the judges between here and Mexico. Why? He's got a problem with someone under my protection. Came by my place today with 3 hired guns and some very specific threats." Ford was quiet for a moment, processing the information. This someone under your protection, would she happen to be a woman who ran away from an abusive husband? Wade felt a chill run down his spine. "How did you—" "Because Blackthorne's been spreading money around, asking questions about a missing wife. Offered $1,000 to anyone who could tell him where she was." Ford's voice dropped to a whisper. "Word is, she's got information that could ruin him if it ever got to the right people." "What kind of information?" Ford glanced around again, then leaned forward. "The kind that involves dead girls and unmarked graves. The kind that would interest a federal marshal if someone was brave enough to speak up." Wade felt the blood drain from his face. Vera had told him about the abuse, the control, the threats, but she'd never mentioned anything about other victims. "How do you know all this?" "Because 3 months ago, a young woman came to me claiming she'd escaped from Blackthorne's house. Said she'd seen things, heard things. Said Blackthorne wasn't just beating his wife, he was bringing other women to the house. Women who disappeared after a few days." Wade's hands clenched into fists on the table. "What happened to this woman?" Ford's expression grew grim. "Found her in the river 2 weeks later. Doc said she drowned, but I've seen enough bodies to know the difference between an accident and murder. Someone held her under until she stopped breathing." The saloon suddenly felt too hot, too crowded. Wade pushed back from the table, needing air, needing space to process what he'd just learned. "Wade?" Ford's voice stopped him. "Sit down. We're not done talking." Wade forced himself to return to his seat, though every instinct he had was screaming at him to ride back to the ranch and make sure Vera was safe. "This woman who came to me," Ford continued, "she described Blackthorne's wife. Dark hair, brown eyes about this tall." He held his hand up to indicate height. "Had bruises on her arms and a scar on her forehead from where he'd thrown a bottle at her." Wade's blood turned to ice. Vera had just such a scar, faint but visible if you knew where to look. "She said Blackthorne's wife was the only one who'd seen everything, who could testify about what really happened to those girls. Said if anything happened to her, someone needed to know the truth. And now Blackthorne's found her." Ford nodded grimly. "And he's not going to let her walk away twice. Not when she's the only witness who can put him in front of a hanging judge." Wade stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "I have to get back to the ranch." "Hold on." Ford grabbed his arm. "Riding back there half-cocked won't help anyone. If Blackthorne's as smart as I think he is, he's not going to make his move tonight. He'll wait, plan, make sure he has all his pieces in place." "You don't know that. I know men like him. They don't take risks unless they have to. He came to your place today to size up the opposition, to see what kind of man you are. Now he knows you won't scare easy, so he'll try a different approach." Wade forced himself to sit back down, though every muscle in his body was tense with the need for action. "What kind of approach?" "Money first. He'll try to buy you off. Maybe offer you enough cash to walk away and forget you ever saw his wife. When that doesn't work, and it won't, he'll try intimidation. Legal papers, threats about losing your ranch, maybe some convenient accidents around your property. And when that doesn't work, Ford's smile was cold as winter. Then he'll try to kill you both. The words hung in the air between them like smoke from a gun barrel. Wade stared at Ford, seeing his own death reflected in the older man's eyes, along with Vera's. So what do you suggest I do? Hand her over to save my own skin? Hell no. I suggest we make sure Victor Blackthorne doesn't get the chance to hurt anyone else ever again. Wade felt a flicker of hope for the first time since Victor had ridden away from his ranch. You're willing to help? Son, I've been waiting 3 months for a chance to take down that bastard. The woman who came to me, the one they found in the river, she was 19 years old, barely more than a child. She came to me for help, and I failed her. Ford's good eye glittered with something that might have been rage or might have been pain. I won't fail again. Wade leaned forward. What do you have in mind? First, we make sure your ranch is defensible. Blackthorne's got money and men, but he's not a military tactician. We can use that against him. And then we go on the offensive. See, Blackthorne's made one big mistake. He's so focused on getting his wife back that he's forgotten the first rule of warfare. Never fight on your enemy's ground when you can make them fight on yours. Wade raised an eyebrow. You want to take the fight to him? I want to end this permanently, and the only way to do that is to make sure Victor Blackthorne can never hurt another woman again. They spent the next hour planning, their voices low and urgent as they worked out details. Ford would ride out to the ranch tomorrow with supplies and a few trusted men. They'd fortify the buildings, set up fields of fire, create a killing ground that would make any assault costly. But more importantly, they'd gather evidence. Ford had contacts in the Rangers, men who could move quickly if they had proof of Blackthorne's crimes. The trick would be getting Vera to talk, to tell them everything she'd seen and heard during her years as Blackthorne's prisoner. She might not want to relive all that, Wade warned. She won't have a choice if she wants to survive. Blackthorne's not going to stop, Wade. Men like him can't stop. It's not in their nature. Ford finished his whiskey and stood up, tossing coins on the table. Get back to your ranch. Stay alert. Keep your weapons close. I'll be out first thing in the morning with help. Wade stood as well, extending his hand. I appreciate this, Captain. More than you know. Ford shook his hand firmly. That woman of yours, she's lucky to have found someone willing to fight for her. Most folks would have handed her over rather than face down Blackthorne. She's worth fighting for. I believe it. Just remember, Wade, this isn't going to end with a conversation or a compromise. Blackthorne's too far gone for that. When the shooting starts, and it will start, there's only going to be one way it ends. Wade nodded grimly. I understand. I hope you do, because tomorrow we start a war. The ride back to the ranch felt longer than usual, shadows seeming to move in ways that made Wade's hand drift toward his gun. But the house was dark and quiet when he arrived, with lamplight glowing softly in the kitchen window. He found Vera sitting at the table, the shotgun across her knees and a cup of cold coffee at her elbow. She looked up when he entered, relief flooding her face. I was starting to worry, she said. Sorry. Took longer than I expected. Wade hung his hat on a peg and sat down across from her. But I found help. Captain Ford is coming tomorrow with supplies and men. Ford? The old ranger? Wade studied her face. You know him? Vera was quiet for a moment, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee cup. I met him once, 3 months ago. There was a woman, another woman who'd escaped from Victor. She came to me for help, but I was too scared to do anything. I told her to go to the Rangers. Wade felt pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. What happened to her? Victor found out she talked to me. He made sure I understood what happened to people who betrayed him. Wade reached across the table and took her hand. Vera, there's something you need to know. Something about Victor that's worse than either of us realized. And sitting there in the lamplight, with danger gathering like storm clouds on the horizon, Wade told her everything Ford had shared. About the missing women, about the unmarked graves, about why Victor would never let her go. When he finished, Vera was crying silently. but her voice was steady when she spoke. He killed them all, didn't he? All those women he brought to the house. Wade nodded. Ford thinks so, and he thinks you're the only witness who can prove it. Vera looked down at their joined hands, then back up at Wade. Then we'd better make sure I live long enough to testify. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows and howling around the corners of the house like a pack of wolves. Tomorrow would bring Captain Ford and the beginning of their war against Victor Blackthorne. Tonight, they would hold each other close and pretend the morning would never come. Dawn came gray and cold, with low clouds hanging over the ranch like smoke from a distant fire. Wade was already up, coffee in hand and eyes on the horizon, when Captain Ford arrived with 3 riders trailing behind him. The men looked like they'd ridden hard through the night, their horses lathered and their faces grim with purpose. "Morning, Wade," Ford called as he dismounted near the porch. "Hope you're ready for company." Wade studied the 3 men Ford had brought. 2 were clearly ex-Rangers, older men with the steady eyes and worn gun leather of professionals who'd survived by being better than everyone else. The third was younger, maybe 30, with the look of someone who'd seen action in recent Indian wars. "Boys," Ford said, gesturing toward his companions, "meet Wade Carter." "Wade, this is Sam Houston McKay, Pete Donovan, and young Billy Crenshaw. They've all got reasons to dislike Victor Blackthorne." Wade shook hands with each man, noting the firm grips and direct gazes. These weren't hired guns or drifters looking for easy money. These were men with scores to settle. "What kind of reasons?" Wade asked. McKay, a grizzled man with silver whiskers, spat into the dust. "Blackthorne killed my daughter, made it look like suicide, but I know better. She was trying to get away from him when she died." Donovan nodded grimly. "He ruined my brother's business, drove him to drink. Tom put a gun to his head rather than face the shame of what Blackthorne's accusations did to his reputation." Billy Crenshaw was quiet for a moment, then spoke in a voice that carried the weight of old pain. "My sister worked as a maid in his house. She disappeared one night. Never found her body, but I know where she went." Wade felt that familiar cold anger settling in his chest. "How many others?" "More than you'd think," Ford said. "Blackthorne's been careful, spread his killing over years and across counties. But when you start talking to the right people, asking the right questions, a pattern emerges." Vera appeared in the doorway, still wearing her apron from preparing breakfast. She looked pale but determined, and Wade saw her take in the 4 armed men with something that might have been hope. "Ma'am," Ford said, touching his hat brim respectfully. "I'm Captain Ford. We're here to make sure Victor Blackthorne doesn't hurt anyone else ever again." Vera nodded, her voice steady despite the slight tremor Wade could hear underneath. "What do you need me to do?" "Tell us everything," Ford said. "Every woman you saw him bring to the house, every conversation you overheard, every detail you can remember. We're going to build a case that'll put him in front of a federal judge." "And if he doesn't give us the chance?" Wade asked. Ford's smile was cold as winter iron. "Then we'll give him the kind of justice he's been avoiding for years." They spent the morning fortifying the ranch. Ford had brought supplies, extra ammunition, a box of dynamite he'd borrowed from a mining operation, and enough food to withstand a siege. They reinforced the windows with wooden shutters, created firing positions with clear fields of view, and set up a defensive perimeter that would make any assault costly. But more importantly, they planned their offense. Ford had contacts in the federal marshal's office, men who could move quickly if they had proper evidence. The trick was getting that evidence in a form that would hold up in court. "Blackthorne's smart," Ford explained as they worked. "He's always made sure his victims couldn't testify, either because they were dead or because they were too scared to speak up. But Vera saw things, heard things. With her testimony and what we can piece together from other sources, we can build a case." "Assuming we live long enough," McKay muttered, checking his rifle for the 3rd time that morning. "We will," Wade said with more confidence than he felt. "Blackthorne's used to intimidating people, buying off opposition. He's not used to fighting men who shoot back." They were still discussing tactics when Billy Crenshaw, who'd been watching the road from the barn loft, called out sharply, "Riders coming!" 6, maybe 7. Wade grabbed his rifle and moved to the window. In the distance, a line of horsemen was approaching at a steady pace. Even at this range, he could make out Victor Blackthorn's distinctive black horse. "He's brought more men this time," Vera said, her voice tight with fear. "Good," Ford replied grimly. "More witnesses to what's about to happen." The riders stopped just outside rifle range, close enough to talk, but far enough away to avoid the first volley of shooting started. Victor sat his horse with the same arrogant confidence he'd shown the day before, but Wade noticed he'd positioned himself behind his men this time. "Carter," Victor called out, "I'm here to make you one final offer." "I'm listening," Wade shouted back, though he had no intention of accepting whatever Victor proposed. $50,000, cash money delivered today. All you have to do is saddle your horse and ride away. Leave the woman and disappear." Wade looked at Vera, saw the fear in her eyes warring with something else. Trust. Faith that he wouldn't abandon her, no matter what Victor offered. "Counter-offer," Wade called back. "You turn around and ride out of Texas. Never come back, never bother anyone again, and maybe you live to see next Christmas." Victor's laugh carried clearly across the distance. "You're making a mistake, Carter. I've got 10 men to your 5. I've got legal papers saying that woman is my property, and I've got the sheriff of 3 counties in my pocket." "Then I guess you'd better use them," Wade replied, "because I'm not moving." The talking stopped. For a long moment, the two groups of men faced each other across the dusty yard, tension thick as smoke in the air. Wade could feel his heart hammering against his ribs, could sense the other men making final preparations for what was coming. Then Victor raised his hand, and his men spurred their horses forward. The battle erupted like a thunderclap. Victor's hired guns came in hard and fast, guns blazing as they tried to close the distance to the house. But Ford had chosen his defensive positions well. The first volley from the ranch dropped 2 men from their saddles and sent the others scrambling for cover. Wade found himself back to back with Vera, both of them firing through the kitchen window as bullets splintered the walls around them. She handled the shotgun like she'd been born to it, steady and calm despite the chaos erupting around them. "The barn!" Ford shouted from his position near the front door. "They're trying to flank us through the barn." McKay and Donovan shifted to cover the new threat, their rifles cracking steadily as they laid down suppressing fire. Wade saw one of Blackthorn's men go down, clutching his shoulder, but the others kept coming. The fight lasted 20 minutes that felt like hours. Gunsmoke filled the air, mixing with dust kicked up by horses and men diving for cover. Wade lost count of how many shots he fired, focused only on the immediate threat of keeping Victor's men from reaching the house. Then suddenly, the shooting stopped. Wade peered cautiously through the window, trying to see what had changed. 3 of Victor's men were down, either dead or wounded too badly to fight. 2 others had their hands raised, clearly wanting no more part of the battle. But Victor himself was nowhere to be seen. "Where is he?" Vera asked, echoing Wade's own thoughts. "Gone to ground," Ford replied, reloading his rifle with practiced efficiency. "Man like that doesn't stick around when the shooting gets serious." But Wade had caught a glimpse of movement near the back of the house, a flash of dark clothing disappearing around the corner. Victor hadn't run. He'd circled around, looking for a way to get to Vera while his men kept the defenders busy. "He's trying for the back door," Wade said, already moving. "Ford, keep an eye on those men outside. I'm going after Blackthorn." Wade slipped out through the kitchen, moving carefully along the side of the house. He could hear Victor before he saw him. The man was trying to force the back door, cursing softly as he struggled with the heavy wooden bar Wade had installed. "Having trouble?" Wade asked, stepping around the corner with his rifle trained on Victor's back. Victor spun around, his hand dropping toward his gun, but stopped when he saw Wade's finger on the trigger. "You're making a serious mistake, Carter," Victor said, but there was none of his earlier confidence. His face was flushed with exertion and anger, his expensive clothes torn and dusty. "The only mistake I made was not shooting you yesterday when you first showed up on my land." Victor's eyes darted toward the house, calculating distances and odds. "That woman in there belongs to me. She's my wife, my property. You've got no legal right to keep her. She's not property, never was, and she's not going anywhere with you." "You don't understand what you're dealing with," Victor snarled. "I've killed better men than you, Carter. I've buried people who thought they could stand up to me." "I know," Wade said quietly. "Vera told me about the others. About the women you murdered. Something flickered in Victor's eyes. Surprise, maybe, or fear. She doesn't know anything. Crazy woman, making up stories to get attention. She knows enough. And so do we. Federal marshals are already on their way, Victor. Your killing days are over. Victor's hand moved toward his gun in a quick, desperate motion. But Wade was ready. His rifle cracked once, sharp and final in the afternoon air. Victor Blackthorne crumpled to the ground, his expensive clothes already darkening with blood. He tried to speak, to say something, but only managed a wet cough before his eyes went glassy and still. Wade stood over the body for a long moment, feeling not triumph, but a weary kind of relief. It was over. Finally, completely over. Wade? Vera's voice from the back door, uncertain and hopeful. He turned to find her standing there, beautiful and alive and free for the first time in years. It's finished, he said simply. She walked to him across the dusty yard, stepping carefully around Victor's body without looking down. When she reached Wade, she put her arms around him and held on tight. What happens now? She asked. Wade looked toward the house where Ford and the others were securing Victor's surviving men. Tomorrow would bring questions, paperwork, the slow machinery of justice. But tonight, there would be peace. Now we live, Wade said, holding her close. We just live. The sun was setting over the ranch, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Somewhere in the distance, a meadowlark sang its liquid song, and the evening wind carried the scent of grass and hope across the land they'd fought to defend. Victor Blackthorne was dead, and for the first time in 3 years, the future looked bright. 3 weeks had passed since Victor Blackthorne breathed his last in the dust behind Wade's ranch house. 3 weeks since the federal marshals had arrived to clean up the mess, to catalog the evidence, to close the book on one of Texas's most dangerous predators. The investigation had been swift and thorough. Vera's testimony, combined with evidence Ford's contacts had gathered from other victims' families, painted a picture of systematic murder that shocked even hardened lawmen. In the end, they'd connected Blackthorne to the deaths of 11 women across 3 counties. 11 women who disappeared into the Texas wilderness, their only crime being that they'd crossed paths with a man who saw them as disposable. Now Wade stood on his porch in the morning light, coffee cup in hand, watching Vera tend to her garden. She'd expanded it in the weeks since the shooting, adding rows of vegetables and a small section of wildflowers that attracted butterflies and bees. It was, Wade realized, the first time she'd felt safe enough to plant something she might actually get to harvest. Morning, she said, looking up from where she knelt among the tomato plants. The bruises were long gone now, replaced by the healthy color of a woman who no longer flinched at shadows. Morning yourself. Coffee's fresh if you want some. Vera stood, brushing dirt from her hands. She wore a simple blue dress that Wade had bought for her in town, the first new clothing she'd owned in years that hadn't been chosen by someone else. The sight of her in it still made his heart skip a beat. In a minute, I want to finish with these plants first. She paused, studying his face. You've got that look again. What look? The one that says you're thinking too hard about something that should be simple. Wade took a sip of his coffee, using the moment to organize his thoughts. Vera had learned to read him with an accuracy that was both comforting and unnerving. Federal marshals coming by today, he said finally. Wants to tie up some loose ends, make sure we don't need anything else for the trial. There wouldn't actually be a trial, since Blackthorne was dead, but there were still legal matters to settle. Property to be distributed to victims' families, business dealings to be unwound, the vast machinery of justice grinding slowly toward closure. That's not what's bothering you, Vera said, moving closer to the porch. What is it, Wade? Wade set down his coffee cup and looked at her directly. Blackthorne's lawyer came by yesterday while you were in town. Seems Victor left a will. Vera's face went pale. And? He left everything to his beloved wife. That's you, Vera. The house in San Antonio, the cattle operations, the bank accounts, all of it. The silence stretched between them like a held breath. Wade watched emotions flicker across Vera's face. Surprise, fear, and something else he couldn't quite identify. How much? She asked quietly. Enough to buy half of Texas, maybe more. Vera sank onto the porch steps, overwhelmed. I don't want it. Any of it. That money, that property. It's all built on blood and suffering. I know. That's why the lawyer suggested you might want to sell everything, donate the proceeds to families of the victims, set up a fund to help other women in situations like yours. Vera looked up at him sharply. Other women? Wade nodded. Captain Ford's been thinking about it. Says there are probably dozens of women out there right now, trapped in situations like yours was. With Blackthorn's money, you could fund safe houses, legal aid, maybe even hire people to help them start new lives. For the first time since he'd started talking, Vera smiled. Turn his blood money into something good. Something like that. Vera stood and walked to where Wade leaned against the porch railing. What do you think I should do? Wade was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. I think you should do whatever feels right to you. But I also think Victor Blackthorn would hate knowing his money was being used to help the very people he tried to destroy. Vera's smile widened. Then that's exactly what we'll do. Wade felt something ease in his chest. We? Did you think I was planning to handle this alone? Wade Carter, you saved my life in more ways than one. If we're going to help other women find their freedom, we're going to do it together. The word we hung in the air between them, loaded with implications neither had been brave enough to voice until now. Wade reached out and took Vera's hand, marveling at how perfectly it fit in his. Vera, there's something else we need to talk about. She tilted her head, curious. You're free now. Really free. Victor's dead. His threats can't touch you anymore. You could go anywhere. Do anything. Wade's voice grew rough with emotion. You don't have to stay here out of gratitude or obligation. Vera stepped closer, her brown eyes serious. Is that what you think? That I'm only here because I owe you? I just want you to know you have choices. Real choices. For the first time in years. Vera was quiet for a long moment, her thumb tracing circles on the back of Wade's hand. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady and sure. Wade Carter, 3 years ago, you lost your wife and child in a fire. You came out here to hide from the world, to nurse your grief in private. But instead of staying hidden, you opened your door to a broken woman who needed help. Wade started to speak, but Vera held up her free hand. You fed me, protected me, fought for me when I'd forgotten how to fight for myself. You gave me back my courage, my sense of worth. You reminded me what it felt like to be safe. Tears were running down her cheeks now, but her voice never wavered. So yes, I have choices now. I could go to California and try to find my brother. I could use Victor's money to travel the world, to see places I never dreamed of visiting. I could do anything. Wade felt his heart preparing to break. But the only choice that matters to me is this one. I choose you, Wade Carter. I choose this ranch, this life we've built together. I choose love over fear, hope over hiding. Wade pulled her into his arms then, holding her tight against his chest while something that had been broken inside him for 3 years finally began to heal. Are you proposing to me, Miss Cross? He asked when he could trust his voice again. Vera pulled back to look at him, her eyes sparkling with mischief. I suppose I am. What do you say, Cowboy? Want to make an honest woman of me? Wade's answer was a kiss that tasted like coffee and morning sunshine and the promise of all their tomorrows. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathless and laughing. I'll take that as a yes, Vera said. Yes, Wade confirmed. To all of it. The marriage, the mission to help other women, the whole crazy, beautiful future we're going to build together. They were still holding each other when Captain Ford rode up, his weathered face creasing into a rare smile at the sight of them. Well, he called out as he dismounted, I guess congratulations are in order. News travels fast, Wade replied, though he didn't let go of Vera. Don't need news when the evidence is right in front of me. You two look like people who've figured out what they want. Vera stepped forward, extending her hand to Ford. Captain, I've made a decision about Victor's estate. I want to use every penny of it to help women escape situations like mine. Wade says you might have some ideas about how to make that happen. Ford's smile widened. Ma'am, I've got a whole list of ideas, and I know some good people who could help make it work. As the three of them stood talking in the morning sunshine, planning their campaign to turn Victor Blackthorn's legacy of fear into something hopeful, Wade marveled at how completely his life had changed. 6 months ago, he'd been a broken man living alone with his grief. Now he was engaged to a woman he loved more than his own life, preparing to embark on a mission that could help dozens of other women find the freedom Vera had fought so hard to claim. It wasn't the life he'd planned, but it was better than anything he could have imagined. As the sun climbed higher over the Texas plains, painting the ranch in shades of gold and promise, Wade Carter and Vera Cross began to plan their wedding, their mission, and their future. Behind them, the house that had been a hiding place was transforming into a home. Around them, the land that had been a refuge was becoming a launching point for something bigger than either of them had dared to dream. And somewhere in the distance, carried on the wind that swept endlessly across the frontier, was the sound of hope being born, the sound of second chances and new beginnings, the sound of love triumphant in a harsh and unforgiving world. 6 months later, Wade and Vera Carter stood hand in hand outside the first safe house they'd established with Victor Blackthorn's blood money. The small house in Austin was already home to 3 women who'd escaped abusive situations, women who were learning to build new lives with the support and resources they needed. "Mrs. Patterson says the woman from Dallas is ready to testify," Vera said, reading from a letter that had arrived that morning. "That makes 7 women willing to speak out about their experiences." Wade squeezed her hand. 7 women who won't have to face their abusers alone. It had been the most rewarding 6 months of either of their lives. The Blackthorn Foundation for Women's Safety was already operating in 4 Texas cities, providing not just shelter but legal aid, job training, and the kind of practical support that helped women truly escape their past. "Sometimes I think about him," Vera said quietly, "about Victor and how he'd react to knowing his money was being used this way." "Regrets?" Vera laughed, the sound bright and free. "Not a single one, except maybe that he didn't live long enough to see what real justice looks like." Wade pulled her closer, marveling as he did every day at the strength of the woman he'd married. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Carter?" "More than ready." They climbed into their wagon for the ride back to the ranch, where their own new beginning was taking shape. Vera was 3 months pregnant now, carrying the child they'd both thought they'd never have. The child who would grow up in a house built on love instead of fear, surrounded by the vast Texas sky and the endless possibility of the frontier. As their wagon rolled through the gathering dusk, past fields of cattle and endless grass, Wade thought about all the broken people who'd somehow found each other in this hard country. People like him and Vera, like Captain Ford and all the women they were helping to heal. The frontier was brutal, unforgiving, quick to bury the weak and the unlucky. But it was also a place where second chances were possible, where people could remake themselves, where love could grow from the ashes of loss. What would you do if someone's past became your fight? If protecting one person meant facing down the most dangerous kind of evil? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one. And if this story of courage, justice, and unexpected love touched your heart, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more tales from the untamed frontier. Because out here in the Wild West, the most powerful force isn't money or violence. It's the human spirit refusing to be broken. Thanks for riding with us, and we'll see you on the next trail.